Down of Estes Park. This is our study session for today, intended to go till about 5 p.m. First up is the 2025 Electric Rate Study Director, Bergston.
Thank you very much, trustees. I have good news for you.
This is Estes Park, a quiet community nestled in the Rocky Mountains.
Estes is one of the most beautiful valleys in the country or in the world.
It's also an area that has lots of extreme weather, which can completely disrupt the community's power supply.
In the past 2 years, the town of Estes Park has lost 100% power 3 times.
The electricity
And losing
went out.
power impacts critical facilities.
From a perspective of just life safety, it can impact the town very significantly.
Severe weather can wreak havoc on the community.
2013, we had a major flood. In 2020, we had the largest 2 fires in Colorado history. We've had major windstorms. We have major winter storms every winter.
So in the Rocky Mountains, the weather's very, very unpredictable.
These events prompted the teams at the Platte River Power Authority and Estes Park Power and Communications to take action. Together, they're responsible for providing the community with reliable, affordable power.
Joe and I were already talking batteries, and we saw the grant from the GDO and felt like it was a perfect fit.
This is Joe. He works for Estes Park Power and Communications. Oh, and the GDO? That's the Grid Deployment Office. They're working to build grid resilience through grant programs that fund awesome projects for the communities they serve.
Oh yeah, they're great.
See, the Grid Deployment Office is providing Platte River and Estes Park with funding for a pretty incredible initiative.
Estes Park is a very remote area, so we need to think outside the box on how to provide reliable power, and having a battery in Estes Park on the Estes Park grid is one of the solutions to deliver reliable power.
The initial goal of the battery was to help integrate more renewables, but when we saw this grant, it really kind of made us think a little bit more about this project, and we're identifying other use cases such as improving reliability in transmission outages.
Here's what the team at Estes Park have planned: a battery energy storage system. Basically, it'll shore up resilience, protect critical utility equipment, and enable a future microgrid.
The benefits of having this battery on the Estes grid is to be able to restore power sooner to critical infrastructure. It can also help isolate issue areas where we can turn places on.
It's essential for places like the hospital.
That's the obvious. You've got someone on the operating table in the surgery suite. You've got someone getting a CT or an MRI right then. Everything gets interrupted if you lose your electrical current.
Being able to have that backup like that is going to be a game changer.
That's not all this system would provide. But how will the system work?
Microgrids aren't easy. They're super complex. They involve advanced switching,
Interrupters,
value stacking,
SCADA system,
frequency response, or ancillary services.
all through smart grid and AMI data.
I don't care how the power comes to the taffy shop.
This is Mark. He makes the country's best taffy, which wouldn't happen without GDO's work on grid reliability.
Having electricity is one of the basic expectations of being able to run a business and stay in business.
Tourism is so important for Estes Park.
We have 4.5 million visitors pass through every year, and we have to keep that full slate of services.
All in all, it's going to be a pretty incredible initiative for Estes Park. Thanks, guys. And Guy,
Oh, thanks. My pleasure.
anything else?
Yeah, my band's playing at the Legion tonight.
We are so there. But to find out more about this or GDO's other initiatives, check out energy.gov/GDO.
All right, so no consultant or contractor today.
No, but I will.
This is Estes Park.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, so when we get to it, the different rates are essentially where you go through and we ask, this is a rigorous process. It's very difficult. It's rooted back when the trains started running trains and people had to charge for trains. It's a regulated industry. And so one of the things we do is we group all these different costs together that are brought onto us by customers. And that grouping of those costs are associated with a rate. And so you might imagine that every residential home just kind of looks about the same. Not to offend anybody, but basically we call them the same. And so that's easy to make one rate and design one rate for that group of customers. Second page, I believe, is Rocky Mountain National Park. They don't pay for electricity. They pay to have their electricity delivered. They have an agreement with the Bureau of Reclamation, who creates a lot of electricity. And they say, okay, well, if you want to put a tunnel underneath our park, what do we get out of it? And the Bureau said, electricity forever, as long as our hydro plants run and we use the tunnel. So they're grouped as a special case, and I think they're referred to as a rate that has their own power supply. So that's what's in front of you. Detail of all the rest of them, but the idea is let's group these people together and then go through all of the costs, all of the value of the infrastructure that we put out there, and then associate the cost of service that is associated with those customers. But that is the under 4 next steps. What we're talking about today is just the general overall look of how do we go about making sure that the Power Communications Division is achieving the goals that our town board puts in their strategic plan and mission and vision, the vision being reliable, high quality, natural settings. Can't remember exactly the words. Sorry, I forgot it. I'm a little flustered. I didn't know that we were not going to have a consultant today. And the strategic plan under town finances, it indicates in there we want to have strong finances, making sure our costs and revenues are balanced. And in our case, the revenues are projected. That's how we go about. We project the future costs, project the future revenues, and then with enough money left over for emergencies. So there is another financial policy that says you got to keep 90 days of O&M costs in the bank. So the rate study process, the first thing you do is you go out and you look at a year that's already finished, because that gives you a good benchmark of reality. And I might be getting ahead of myself here. Oh, and you determine the revenue requirements of the utility. So that benchmark actual year, I believe was last year. We're trying to incorporate last year's data as it comes to us in the previous model that we discussed last year, and we requested just a 1-year implementation. I'll remind you it was a 1-year implementation because it was a really windy spring. And then it became a really wet spring, followed by another windy spring, followed by another wet spring. And we spent a lot of time not working on the rate study. We spent a lot of time restoring power. So that is why we came and asked for a one-time rate increase, and then we'd said we'd come back this year with a full rate study. So you go through and you look at that actual year and you say, okay, now what is our revenue requirements during the study period? The test year or that previous year, you look at the operating costs, the capital costs. The costs that we have incurred are just then separated into different categories. For example, We know our benefits escalate at a different percentage than, say, our wages. We know from previous experience, a lot of our inventory costs are much higher now, so those assets are worth a lot more money, so we have to look at that differently. And when we go through and forecast the revenue requirements, it's basically establishing, here's what we're spending, and here's the future years, what are those costs do we expect them to be? And it's a very, very big Excel spreadsheet that Travis asked to look at, and I'm not sure you'll have time to go through it. But that's why that rigorous spreadsheet is associated with why we hire a consultant. It's a very formal process that was very formalized in the 60s with a couple people with their PhDs, and they call them the Bond-Bright principles. So we're following that same type of principle that was set a long time ago. Same thing communities and electric companies, utilities do all around. So then adjust the use of debt. Typically try not to use debt. We do have debt on our books now, but at this point, we have not projected any future debt. We're going to pay for capital improvements and operating expense, well, always operating, but these capital improvements we're planning on paying through rate recovery. And then we start looking at that over the years. If we increase the amount of costs, I might be getting ahead of myself again. So yeah, we did this step one. The step two, we haven't gone through. We've started doing that, but we're not going to talk about it today because there's a couple things we need to clear up with you folks. I'm going to ask for feedback at the end of this. So we go through, we functionalize the costs. We understand here's the customer costs. For example, I always like to communicate to people, if we did not sell any electricity, we sold zero electricity, we would still have to send out electric bills. We'd still have to trim trees. And so those costs we call fixed costs associated with operations and maintenance. And so when we sell electricity, we sell it in a rate design where we recover fixed revenues, that's your monthly fee. And then there's a variable cost associated with how much energy and demand being the larger customers that a customer uses. So if no customers are using anything, that monthly fixed base fee hypothetically would cover all of our fixed fees. That is something I'll bring up that's a little bit of a problem because people like doing that when you know that you're growing your sales, because then you can cover those fixed costs in your growing sales. But Estes Park doesn't really grow much. And so that creates rate pressure, essentially. Classifying the costs. So then when we classify those costs, we're talking about the demand, the energy, and all of this step that we're going through is establishing what kind of rate design, how much money we're getting from all of these different functions and the costs that we're getting from the functions that we serve. And so then we go through and allocate the costs. So you can see this top chart, there's some percentages across there, and this is not all of our rates, obviously. But then you start associating, okay, well, what's the split between energy, that's our sales, that can go up and down. But the demand piece is a little bit, that is associated with our infrastructure. And we don't change our infrastructure much. It's built, we expand it, but developers pay for expansion. So those costs associated with demand are essentially a lot of those fixed costs. If, for example, it won't happen, somebody came in and said, well, we need a big server farm here. The town of Estes Park max load is run 26 megawatts. So in a wintertime, deep wintertime, cold, we go up to 26 megawatts. A server farm runs about 26 to 30. So if a server farm came in here, you can imagine we're talking about a huge investment in our infrastructure associated with the demand. So that demand is associated with our infrastructure, whereas the energy is associated with today, someone's thrown coal into the burner to make some electricity. In 2030, it's going to be batteries, it's going to be wind power, solar power, and some natural gas when it gets cold and dark and not windy. So that is what we're doing in this step when we go through and start designing rates, allocating the different costs to the different customers. Like I said, the residential customers all kind of look the same. Some might have a higher demand than others. Some might have more energy usage than others, but they all kind of look comparatively the same compared to, say, a water plant or a sewer plant. So this is just an outline. This is a big outline here saying, okay, you generate power in these faraway sites, and this, of course, is changing. That's what the video was talking about, DERs, distributed energy resources, which means now it's no longer the central power plant. They're going to be distributed out. But today, essentially, we are that rawhide central power plant, goes into a transformer, goes across the big, like you see out here across the lake, the lattice structure transmission towers. We have 2 substations. So if you're going from generation, you see the transmission substation. We have 2 of those and 4 large transformers. So 2 large transformers at each substation. And then you get into the power poles. The H structure ones, those aren't ours. But this is somebody else's drawing. And then distribution. Oh, okay, I see all right. And then down to the homes and businesses at the end. Where we break is, if you were to actually draw that line right, oh, actually, no, it's now it is at the high side of the distribution transformer. Everything in the top part is PRPA. And in the future, it'll be PRPA in the market. Everything on the bottom part is Joe and his crew. So that is what we're here to talk about today, because everything on the PRPA side is actually through a pass-through. We call that the wholesale power cost adjustment. If you were to look at an electric bill, we reset that to 0 when we do electric rates. But then the next year, in order for us to avoid doing rate studies every year, which is not cheap, we do them every 3 years. That's our target. So we'll ask you to consider a 3-year rate increase so we don't have to go do a rate study. And the way we adjust for that is the increasing costs from Platte River Power Authority are calculated for the future year and put into this wholesale power cost adjustment. And then this will go through and talk about the generation functions, transmission functions. We do have a bill that comes from Platte River every day, and it's not as simple as our bills that go out to the communities. One of the Bond Bright principles is you can't be so complicated that your customers can't understand their bill. Well, that doesn't apply to PRPA. So their bills are very complicated. They're seasonal, summer charges, because that's where their peak demand is. They have to create this huge infrastructure to support that peak demand in the summer when all the air conditioners down in the valley are blowing. We peak in the winter, so it's a little bit different. But they have seasonal charges, they have transmission charges, they have wheeling, they have all sorts of charges, and our consultant will go through and look at those to make sure that we have a good understanding of the charges. However, again, these, at the end of the day, the dollar amount is a pass-through. Distribution customer, this is where we start getting much, much more integrated into our rate study process. So the distribution function is really the linemen, the ground workers, the locators, everybody out in the shop area. The customer function, that's utility billing. That's the meters on everybody's homes, the people that replace the meters, people that read the meters, the systems like AMI that we use to read the meters. Those are the customer functions. And inside that, it looks like our DER programs are also being considered. We do have those costs more weighted into the distribution side. But the fixed versus variable, we did talk briefly about this. So they're fixed versus variable, the demand related, that's more the fixed because we don't change the infrastructure. It is, our cost is associated with the highest demand, which is in the winter, 26 megawatts. You can ask Joe, he just told us 26. And then the energy related charges. Excuse me. So then we, again, distribution and then customer charges. So the expenses are heavily weighted towards our fixed costs. It's a very infrastructure heavy business. And so our fixed costs, you can see under the expense pie chart there, make up most of our costs. However, our revenues mostly come from energy. So this is where we get into a challenge. I'll mention that challenge in a minute. So we go through this cost of service, functionalizing those costs, identifying, projecting them out in the future by putting escalations on them. And we create that guide for the cost-based rates. Then we go through the rate-making process. That's where the policy decision comes in. Do we want to incentivize certain behaviors that we can influence with rates? If you look at that rate sheet, you'll see time of day. There's a time of use and a time of day, and the multiple of those, because we want to incentivize people to not use electricity during the middle of the, during the evenings or in the morning, because people tend, generally, to wake up at about the same time and want to turn on their lights and their refrigerators and get stuff out. And so that demand for electricity goes up in the morning, and people tend to get off work, go to restaurants, go home, make their dinner. So the demand goes up again really high. So those time of use rates are there to incentivize people to avoid using electricity during those times. Specifically in the winter, because there are devices, we winter peak because of the heat. So there are devices that we were selling for quite a long time. They're not quite as popular anymore. That basically store the electricity as heat. And then during these time periods when electricity is more expensive for everybody, it stops using that electricity and puts the heat out through those very high density breaks. So that is an example of incentivizing a behavior. Now, every time I look at acronyms that says COS, I think of cosine. But it's not cosine, it's cost of service. So we want to align these costs of service with this rate. Now, when you look at the rates, this is where we go through and we say, look, we need to collect sufficient revenue. We have to have the 90-day O&M. We got to make sure we have a bond covenant that says you got to have 1.25 debt service coverage ratio. And I think I saw Tammy behind me, and she might actually be able to tell you what that means, but I can't. And all, of course, enough money to cover the capital investments we're making and all the O&M expenses. Should I slow down and ask if anybody has any questions?
Even though I know it's wholesale passing through from PRPA after the Resource Diversification Plan was written in 2018 by the 4 municipalities saying we must go green, and even setting a target pre-COVID, granted. I believe that over time, some of the green power and transition to green power costs more money. And we'll continue to see that as we progress to a higher percentage of that, even though that is the noble and right path to go to. That's correct.
That is correct. And back in 2018, which it was late 2018, so in the year of 2019, the PRP board also said we need to rate smooth. We understand this is going to cost more. And so actually those rates at a wholesale level were intentionally a little bit higher to absorb that. I mean, let's face it, when you go out and buy a number of gas turbines, I can't remember the number, but I think it's half 500 million, 50 million, I can't remember. I'd be lying if I told you. It's a whole lot of money. So, but we do that rate smoothing, and we will recommend rate smoothing here too. It's just due diligence. I mean, nobody wants to see the rates go up one year, 10%, and then 1% the next year. That is not good business. It's not good. It doesn't feel predictable. How am I going to go out and manage my personal money if I can't even have some semblance of a cadence of smaller rate increases instead of this big thing? So yes, that is passed through with the wholesale. And then in addition to that, we have to do things on our side, which we started doing back in 2012. Started looking at AMI, that's part of green energy. And there's a whole lot more investments that we're looking at now in cooperation with PRPA. Hopefully that will spread across all the organizations, and we can, what I'll say is quasi vertically integrate so that we're all kind of using common systems, make everything much better. So the rate study process, again, this kind of goes back to the bond bright principles, the objectives, the best practices. You got to have revenue stability, and that again goes back to the town board goal under town financial. Be healthy, have some extra money for emergency rainy day fund. That's the 90-day O&M. Simplicity, we talk to people about rates a lot. And some of the hardest ones are over net meters because, and Lord help us if we have to talk about a time of use net meter, because they're very complex. And so there has to be some simplicity in these rates so that people understand them. We can discuss it with people. Legislative and regulatory compliance, we used to be under FERC. We aren't under FERC anymore. That's good. That leave me of a whole lot of responsibilities, but there are certain regulatory responsibilities that even in utility billing we're still following. For example, if it's below a certain temperature, we aren't going to shut somebody's power off, even if they're 90 days past due. Modernization, distributed generation, virtual power plant, electric vehicles. So these are some of the capital projects that we're looking at that O&M costs. Sarah Clark, unfortunately she's not here. I'll give her and Joe a shout out to say they are attending meetings with PRPA and the other owner communities on a regular basis to discuss how we're going to start the ground foundational work to make all of this stuff to come to fruition. That's an O&M cost, but on the capital investment side, we are continuing to invest in our smart grid. Interrupters, yeah, you heard Joe talk about interrupters, trip savers. And then align the utilities revenues collection with that cost. So that gets into the rate design that we'll touch on the next time we meet. Incorporating that we have, if rates are not well designed or not aligned with the cost of service, yes, then that's when we start running into financial instability, cost recovery, and that's what we're avoiding. So in order to avoid it, I fully recognize, and I paid the electric bills, it's not fun to see them go up, but it's important to maintain our electric system. So this goes down into a breakdown of all the expenses. You can see our source of supply by far is the largest. Other operating expenses, as I mentioned, Joe and Sarah are going to these meetings talking about DERs, ADMS. battery management systems, all that O&M cost, going out and trimming trees, restoring power when the power is out. All of those costs are in the other part of that darker blue, other operating expenses. General fund transfer is in there, debt service, and capital from rates. So we do get grants. Grants don't pay for operating expenses. They pay for future investments, like the video we just watched that is helping us fund this battery that's going in. Those capital investments can be offset with grants if we get grants. But all the other investments that we have to make are covered with the rates. So, if no action is taken, we say, hey, we're good, no need to raise rates. This is what happens to our 90-day O&M. 2026, it falls very low. Hopefully not as low as that shows. And then in 2027, we don't make it. So that commitment that we have as a policy, I think that's a town board policy, but I see that Travis is doing it. That is a policy, and we're gonna abide by it. We're gonna recommend rates that keep above that red line. Debt service coverage ratio drops below 1.25 in the year 2026. Rate increase needed to keep our financial stability. Proposed rate implementation plan. So again, no rates, all this, we draw down, we got rate shock. What happens is all of a sudden, yeah, you don't raise rates, you fall below the 90-day. What happens? Rate shock. You have to raise the rates a lot in 1 year to catch back up. And so right now we know, we've gone through this number, and we know that the rate increase needs to be somewhere between 4% and 5% annually for the next 3 years. We also have discussions of, well, what if we were to ask for a rate implementation in, say, September? How would that impact it? Well, so that goes down a little bit, as you would expect, because these are compounding and we're collecting those revenues earlier. So anywhere between 4% and 5%. It depends on decisions from the strategic plan, which we just did last week. So this is a historical graph of where rate increases have been. Looks like they're flat in 2011 for a couple years, almost flat. Jumped up to 4%. You can see it's kind of all over the board. 6%, that was after the, we tried to stabilize electric bills after the flood. But that resulted in a 6% increase, which is, we'd like to avoid that. We like rate smoothing should look a little bit better than that. So in last year, in August 13th, you approved that rate increase of 5%. And in January, that's what we were estimating when we put this together. Wholesale power cost adjustment. Impacted it to, I'd like to look at that again because it seems like a very small impact. Yeah, that's probably pretty close to right. I think Platte River was putting forward what they said was, you know, across the entire board, but it impacted us around 5%, and that is half of our budget, so about 2.5%.
Can I ask you about the increase last year? You said earlier that was an increase in lieu of a rate study because there was so much going on. A rate study wasn't completed. We went with a 5% increase, and you know we see a range from nothing, very small, up to 6%. So it's in the upper percentage of the rate increases. And without going back into my notes, my memory is escaping me on some things, but why was it such a large increase almost as a placeholder until the rate study could be completed? Would we be better off to just say residents and business owners plan on 3%? That's what we're shooting for every year because there's a lot of feedback, right? Anytime you raise the prices on anything, there's a lot of feedback. but this is something that people don't have a choice on. So people are a lot more cognizant when they feel it in their checkbook, as I am. But this stands out. Everything that you've said so far, that 5% seems like a big increase in lieu of a rate study that could substantiate the need for that big increase.
I
Can you?
respect your
Well, I don't know.
characterization.
I'm asking the question because you're the guy, and I have no idea.
It was running late, so we were running late, and we needed to get this forwarded. The intention was to have that earlier. So I look at 5% and go, if you compare it to other costs that everybody was occurring during the COVID years that we didn't include in our last rate study, they're, in general, I think I'd have to go back and tell you what the consumer price index and all of those were, but we saw some huge impacts through the COVID years. And so I look at 5% and thought, yeah, that feels pretty low.
Well,
That's a relative thing, and everybody has their perspective. If
Yeah,
you're running a small business and have to pay the bill,
Yeah, I
of course,
hear
it
you.
looks big.
I hear you. When do you think that we will, this is gonna, maybe this is a little philosophical. At what point do we stop saying COVID years and comparing everything to the COVID years and things were hard in the COVID years? And just,
I'm
I don't
guessing
even
that'll be
necessarily need an
after
answer.
this rate study because we do 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
So this rate study, we're looking at the impacts of COVID.
Okay.
The next time we do 3 years, we'll look at what we're impacting in these 3 years. And as you know, if you look at the news, we're not sure exactly what that's going to look like yet, but we do know there's instability. So
There will
what we're
always
doing
be,
is
right, there will always
basically
be.
we're trying to predict the future. We know we're wrong. And then we look at the past, but that's where that test year comes in. The test year is the actuals. We don't use hypotheticals, we use actuals. And so the actuals that we're looking at were the impacts of the COVID years. The next time, the actuals will be the impacts of the previous 3 years.
This year, with a lot of dramatic changes and a lot of foreign goods that feed even some of the green power stuff and tariffs going over the rainbow, when we look back at these 3 years, 2023, 4, 5, we might see some things just as dramatic as COVID, but, well, we'll wait and see. But right now, we're in a position where those cost of goods, cost of production, cost of import goods could have very far-reaching effect, too.
Yeah, and we don't try and model that. And so if those things come to fruition, we manage it.
Is that supposed to be 1/1/2025 over on the far right side?
I'm not sure where you're looking.
On the x-axis, I think it's supposed to be what, 125.
Yeah, the last number on the bottom axis. Yeah. Anyway,
Oh,
minor correction.
yes. You're right. God, Excel. What did Excel do to me? I'm gonna have to go back to that.
Anyway, we're actually
Gates.
closing in on the time that we
Oh.
had allotted. Go ahead.
I'll try and speed up the next steps. We're gonna go through and give you a much more solid number to request for rate increase, and that will have implications on each of the rates. So it'll be, each rate class will be impacted differently because we don't want, when we do the math, we're trying to make sure one rate class doesn't subsidize the others. And so this is, I'd love some feedback. This is what we've been doing since we talked about rate increase last. Joe Lockhart, Sarah went out to Glen Haven to talk about our CIP plan and the financial impacts of those. Went to the library, went to Allen's Park, and then showed up at the library again. We did a news release, social media post that was just recently to talk about tonight and our future plans. And right now, this is where I'd like you to look at it and try and tell me if you think you're feeling comfortable with it, because we need to mail something to all our customers that says this is going to happen.
If,
What? Please go ahead.
as long as our board agendas will tolerate it, June is better than October. So I prefer earlier rather than later. Go ahead, Trustee.
What's
Igo.
the objective with public engagement? What is the objective with going out and meeting in Glen Haven and meeting in everywhere? Is it to say, this is happening, here's why? Or what do you think? Or are you asking questions like, do you want feedback from the community? Because they'll say, well, lower the rates, obviously, and sell something. What's the objective with your community engagement?
Community engagement.
What are you trying to gain from that?
People that come in and tell us what they think, what they hear, ask us questions. They may not know what kind of costs that we're incurring or why these things are going out. Some of them don't care.
So it's more education than it is soliciting feedback? Is that fair? I'm not trying to
It
catch
is
on
both.
this. I'm
It
just
is
trying
both.
to
So for
establish
example, we got a public input
specifically.
recently from a resident on High Drive. Said, replace my overhead lines. We had a big fire out here. So yeah, we engage with them. I'll give her a call, tell her that the town board, the town elected a 1A sales tax. Some of that money goes to us, and work with Joe to identify which of those power lines we're going to replace. We've replaced quite a few already, and let that resident know, well, you're obviously not aware, we are doing this work. So we're starting from the west of town because that's where the wind typically blows. So it's engaging with anybody willing to come and talk to us and ask us questions.
Has it been successful? Are you seeing people, can you quantify it in numbers?
You probably talk to more people than me, so I'd probably say I'd ask you. I think a lot of times people read it, and maybe they don't think to call. I mean, that's part of public engagement. If you could mandate that everybody come and listen, probably have more people today. Yeah. But
okay,
this is part of the so why do we mail it? If we mail it and it is in an envelope that shows up somebody's house,
but predominantly it's to explain what the reasonings for the increases are, the complexity of the formulas. It's educational predominantly, and yet the dialogue you appreciate.
And just to clarify, I think Trustee Igo was asking specifically, did you get folks to show up to Glen Haven, the library, Allen's Park? What was the turnout? Is that what you were trying to get at?
Yeah, but
okay.
That's so hard.
Yeah.
I only went to one as virtual.
Yeah, we had a huge turnout in Glen Haven. I think there's 2 or 3 people that showed up. And we had 5 in Allen's Park and maybe 6 in...
And this goes to one of the points we've made in other things, that community engagement is very difficult.
Yes.
And I recognize that in my position, and sometimes because I say a lot, people think it's safe to say something to me, and then I sound like a complainer. But it's really important for people I see one constituent in the audience today here at a rate study conversation. After it goes out on Facebook, after the last rate increase and went on Facebook, people say, what happened? What do you mean they raised the rates? Well, we're talking about raising the rates today for the future. And I am interested in feedback. If people don't like it, I want to hear from people they don't like it and what else we can do about it. Do we have to sell a bucket truck? Do they want that compromise in service? So I want to hear from people. I don't want to just talk to people.
Yeah, so during these presentations, it's we talk about our capital projects, everything that's going on, what costs money.
Right.
Where's the money going? Inventory was a huge thing. You heard Ruben talk about COVID. Well, the reason why we keep talking about COVID is we still haven't received transformers yet that we ordered during COVID. So we had to do a mass order. Transformers went from $3,000 to $18,000.
I remember the
So those are the
conversations,
conversations we have with the public to let them know, like, hey, yeah, we could stop filling empty positions. we could stop doing capital projects. We could definitely slow down tree trimming. We could definitely reduce the amount of Christmas lights. You know, there's things
so
that we
those
talk
are
about.
all the things that I think need to be part of the conversation the newspaper writes about, or people talk about
Oh, yeah.
at the water cooler, that if the rate increases don't continue at a reasonable rate that is consistent, somewhat predictable,
Yeah.
people will be more likely to accept that rather than saying, stop the rate increases, sell, cut out that. There's got to be
Oh,
compromise.
absolutely.
So I just want to hear that you are educating, and the words you just used are helpful to me to understand why you keep raising my rates.
Yeah.
And my neighbor and everybody else.
Yeah, absolutely. And I pay the same rates too. So I totally understand the whole full circle thing. And those, as you know, those meetings can go any direction. You know, pretty soon they'll complain about Wi-Fi after that. So
No, I agree. I think that's helpful. And I think we actually talked about something to this effect. I went back and read some of my notes from the last one where I think there was a request for us to table it for one more meeting, and that was in August, and we had started talking about it in March, you know, so it was kind of like, it's helpful to have people at the table now and sharing that input. And I think what you just mentioned about, here's what we stand to lose, not just that balance drops below our 90-day, but here are the things that we could, you know, that could be compromised. I think that's a helpful context for people to understand too, myself included. That timeline looks fine to me. I think it's helpful to get some of that done before, like we were holding these public hearings in the middle of July. I think that's a big problem. And I think it was middle of August, which not much better, but so I think it's helpful to try and squeeze it in before the 24th is tough, right? Because that's really where we get into the crazy busy time if people do want to engage. But my question too is, do you expect to have, I think, is it Megan? Would she be at these to give that presentation? Is that
And
the
I
idea?
apologize. It was just, she thought it was going to be virtual today, and
No problem.
we didn't have it set up.
I'm not trying to put you on the spot. I'm just curious if that's something people could expect to hear at those presentations.
And I think, you know, to Trustee Eigel's point, or when we start talking about what could we cut, and we talk about, okay, well, you know, some of the things we're not in control of. We can't cut the way the market changes. However, things like Christmas lights, things like, you know, we could start carving out and have those discussions. The response time, we internally talk a lot about the cost to live in Estes Park, and should we allow our staff to live in the Loveland? That means if there is a flood and they can't get, the restoration time is going to get much longer. And right now we got an award from APPA that we are in the top 25% quartile. So that's great news. And if we don't want to be that great, that's we can talk about that.
But, and I really, to piggyback on what they're saying is, I think it's really important to have those exact things, because they, you know, oh yeah, we're going to drop below that threshold. That doesn't mean anything to them, right? But if they understand the lights and the response time and all of that, they get that. And then they can make that choice. So I think that's really important to have that conversation, in that context, to just really, even though it's nitty gritty, that's what it's going to be, right? So they
I
need to hear
appreciate
that.
this, because I even told Town Administrator Mahalik, I can't remember when it was, but we were talking, and I said, you know, is there any way we could get into an earlier study session, or get in early? We need to start this conversation. And I'm going to say, you know, every one of these messages, when we do a mailing, when we do the social media, when we do this stuff, there's a call to action. There is a call to action to say, we want you to come out and engage. You can do it through a letter, you can do it through legal, or you can do it in person. Here's the time, here's the place. So that call to action too is that we're stressing, come talk to us. And I talked to, you know, I basically begged to meet today, and thank you for bringing this on today. And I said, I'm really struggling because I feel like when Megan shows up, we get an academic discussion about bond break principles and how we mathematically do this. And I always think to myself, is there a better way to communicate? So I appreciate it. And I'll strive to try and put some of that material together. It can be challenging, and I'll work with the town administrator to make sure I don't put my foot in my mouth.
Okay, thanks.
So I do want to just be clear. When I
Yes.
say we're going to go forward with this, this is a Colorado revised statute legal requirement for us to mail this out to every one of our customers. So when we mail it out, we want to make sure, I mean, we can mail it more than once, but one of the things we're trying to avoid is tell people we're going to do this, and then change it, and then you start losing that confidence of people of, okay, well, exactly when was it? They didn't get the second message, and they got the first message. So at this point, there is a 1/3 piece of paper that's going to go into the bill insert with a call to action, a little bit more explanation about our reliability award. That will go out and people will receive it in May.
Unless there's administrative problems, I think this is a good schedule. Let's stay on it.
Oh, and then questions, but it sounds like. And by all means, with this schedule, if you guys feel like we need to show up again and have another conversation in May, yeah, let us know.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.
We have Senior Planner Hornbeck is going to talk to us about the burgeoning annexation policy that we opened that topic a few months back, I think, and this is a continuation of that conversation.
Thank you, Mayor and Trustees. Good afternoon. So yes, Director Correcchia started us off end of last year, diving into some annexation policy, and general direction we received from the board seemed like kind of a tentative, yeah, let's explore this further. So that's why I'm here, taking a little more of a deep dive into some of your questions that came up. Before I go through my presentation, I guess what I'm hoping to get out of this this afternoon is some specific direction on kind of a few questions. Does the town board support the approach that I'm going to outline, which is going to be 2 documents, an internal annexation policy guide, and then a separate intergovernmental agreement with the county that would guide the process? If so, does the example, or do the example IGA cited serve as a good model? Something missing, anything stand out as being inappropriate for the Estes context? And should staff start engaging with county staff on outlining a draft agreement that we'd bring back to you? And finally, should staff work to refine the internal policy based on the concepts I'm going to share with you today? And is using the comp plan as kind of an outline for that policy the correct approach? So with that, kind of dive in, first address some of the questions that came up previously. How do other jurisdictions in Larimer County treat annexations? So most jurisdictions have intergovernmental agreements with the county. They have a general outline that's pretty similar. These deal with a number of issues around development and annexation. So just kind of highlighting some of the key concepts of those agreements. They all have a geographic boundary to define, where is growth appropriate, where does the agreement apply to. They generally have a stipulation that the county will apply the town's comprehensive plans. So this would include, the Estes Forward Comprehensive Plan, the Multimodal Transportation Plan, Parks and Trails plans, all of those. The county will use those as a guide in their decision-making within that geographic boundary. They include development regulations. Generally, the county agrees to apply a certain set of agreed-upon standards within that IGA area. For the Estes context, the standards would probably be the existing Estes Valley zoning standards in their development code. Those standards are very similar to the current Town of Estes Park standards, so there's a lot of similarities there given the past IGA and the fact that we haven't diverged too much from those previous standards, but that'll obviously be changing potentially with the development code rewrite, and we could further kind of diverge in our standards, but there does need to be a kind of agreed upon set of standards. Referrals. So the county will send land use referrals to town staff and vice versa within this area. The purpose of this is that we'd give one another the chance to review and comment for consistency with both the comp plan and those agreed upon standards. And then lastly, regarding annexations, there's a number of stipulations. The jurisdiction municipality agrees to consider annexation of any eligible property. It does not mean that they shall annex, but they'll consider it. It states that the town agrees to pursue annexation of any enclave annexation, enclave being any area completely surrounded by the town jurisdiction. The county agrees not to accept certain land use applications for review, such as rezonings, PUDs, subdivisions, generally the larger type of applications, if that property is eligible for annexation, unless the town has denied annexation. So essentially the town has kind of first right of refusal for these applications. And lastly, the county would require a binding agreement with certain land use applications that properties that are not eligible for annexation will pursue annexation when eligible. So I can pause there. Any questions or thoughts on this?
I have a question. So, so on the flip side of this, if you have a property that is surrounded by town property property, and so the town can require them to annex, correct? What then does the owner of the property have to, if they don't want to annex, let's say you can't, like the town can't provide utilities or whatever. I mean, when you annex into a town, you are expected to receive the town's services. But if those services are not provided, can the town really, even though they're encompassed, is that fair to the owner of the property to be required to annex but receive no services? I mean, I just think it may get a little one-sided on that, and so I didn't know if there was any consideration on the owner's side if there's no services that are being provided.
Trustee Youngland, so first, as a practical matter, I don't think we would annex if we weren't able to provide our municipal services. But beyond that, and I'd have to look it up, but I think there's something in the annexation statute that says that if we do annex and fail to provide certain services, then we have to allow disconnection, de-annexation, after a certain amount of time. So I believe the statutes do consider that.
Okay, that's helpful. I just felt, yeah, it kind of has to have an equal playing field, you know, if those people don't want to annex, and have a, you know, because of that they have a right to not. So, thanks.
Maybe it's an unanswerable question, but how do these municipalities, how well does it work?
Well, I know most of these IGAs have been in place for about 20 years. One or two of them may be newer, but Windsor, Fort Collins, Loveland, I think have all been
So they're
around.
well settled in.
I believe
Okay.
so.
Good enough.
And Mayor, I'd agree with that. This is on the Front Range very common to have an IGA like this that just coordinates between the municipality and the county when an annexation is possible. I'd say once they're in place and people understand how they work and they get followed, they're pretty smooth.
So another question that came up is generally an interest in the cost benefit of an annexation. So a few thoughts on this. Providing a detailed economic analysis of an annexation is something that sometimes does occur usually for a very large annexation with a lot of implications for the municipality. Estes is not likely to see those kind of large annexations. A third-party kind of economic analysis type firm is generally the one best suited to conduct those. Staff could certainly attempt that and provide some analysis. Beyond that, I think we can provide generalizations based on studies that have been conducted over the years nationally. And I don't think any of this is news to the board, but residential development is typically a net loss financially to a jurisdiction. The higher the density, the closer it can come, and potentially it would break even, just as you're getting more efficient in serving a property with less pipes and less roads and more taxpayers. As an example, a house valued at $700,000 in Estes pays to the town $79 annually in taxes. So not much, yeah. Commercial development, typically a net positive, given the sales tax potential, higher property tax rates, et cetera. Also want to point out that fiscal impacts are not the only consideration with an annexation. There are other reasons you might want to annex property that maybe it costs the town money, but you're achieving other goals.
What other goals are on the top of your head?
Workforce housing, preservation.
Controlling the use of the land?
That's fair, yeah. Greater local control over the use, yeah.
Would you say preservation?
Yeah, I was going to say preservation of open space. If it's a valuable piece of land, scenically, ecologically, the town could annex it and include in an annexation agreement stipulations to protect some of those attributes.
And then would you also say annexation of a property that's adjacent to a commercial property that may be annexed later for
Sure.
more income?
Yeah, absolutely. The question came up of how vacation homes impact the math. So what we found from the linkage fee study is that an average revenue of a vacation home in Estes is around $54,000 a year. With a 5% sales tax, that equates to about $2,700 a year annually to the town. There's also the regulatory linkage fee of $1,400. So certainly more revenue than just a standard single-family home. But it would ultimately, I think, be a policy decision, given the caps that are in place for vacation home licenses. If the town were to annex property that has an existing vacation home, would you raise the cap to allow that? So that really a policy decision and from our perspective, but certainly more revenue associated with a vacation home rental. The question of extraterritorial water service came up. So the map on the right, you'll note or be familiar with the town limits, kind of in the red and the more beige yellow color. The orange is showing extraterritorial water customers, just as a point of reference. So the municipal
Are all of those customers subject to annexation if the town decides to do that because they have the water? Is that accurate?
They're not necessarily eligible for annexation, no.
Okay.
Trustee Agel, just to try to
Yeah,
clarify
there's something
that.
recent that, yeah.
So we have in our ordinances now that if you are accepting water from the town, or if you're going to become a new customer, and you are eligible, then we can require you to annex. But you're still only eligible if you meet all those eligibility requirements, including contiguity to the town.
Right.
So if you're not up against town limits, then it doesn't matter.
Okay. And I'm not asking these questions like, hey, let's annex everything. That is not my position. I want to understand it better, so those are where I'm coming from.
I've got a question. Can't you do serial annexations that get you out farther and provides for future continuity by the seriality of the annexation process?
Yes.
Okay. I'm trying to envision how we might do that, but
That's all voluntary annexations.
It would all be
based on
voluntary.
petitions.
yeah.
So Dan's, Attorney Kramer stole some of my thunder, but to get into what the town requires currently for extraterritorial water service, the way the code is written, it says in exchange for water service or increase or modifications, et cetera, the property shall annex if eligible, if required by the town. That's kind of where we've been hung up in, I think, recent past since I've been here. It does not specify under what criteria would it be required, who at the town makes that determination, et cetera. So one recommendation we do have is to add some clarity to that process, either through a municipal code amendment or through annexation policy to clarify what the intent is there and under what circumstances. So properties that are ineligible for annexation are required per code to execute an agreement agreeing to annex when eligible. Any questions before I move on? Okay. So there were a few, I think, specific areas that were mentioned as, well, that might be an area to look at for annexation. So we did some very high level kind of analysis of three of those areas. So Mary's Lake Road corridor was mentioned. This area is mostly built out with single family homes on lots that range in size from about a ½ acre to 1 acre. There's approximately 85 parcels that that front directly on Mary's Lake Road. There are a handful of larger lots that could potentially develop or redevelop. The most notable is an 11-acre parcel owned by the Housing Authority. Very few properties are eligible for annexation. Again, the contiguity requirement, you see the town limits towards the north. So it would not really be possible to annex the whole corridor. If the town board wanted to be proactive, one possible option, and this would likely involve the serial annexation concept, would be to annex the roadway, Mary's Lake Road right-of-way, from the current boundary down south to Peakview Drive or Mary's Lake Road or to Mary's Lake. That would open up and make all these properties that front on the road eligible. They would still be subject to voluntary annexation, subject to the property owner's interest.
Can I ask the whole audience, the annexing a right-of-way seems like a strategy to get in the neighborhood. Is that something that CDOT or whoever the county, I guess, owns that right-of-way, are they amenable to that? Are they interested in that? Of course, dump the cost of the road, taking care of it, fixing it, maintaining it, policing it. Is that an easy process or is that an act of Congress?
My perspective is, like you mentioned, they would likely love to get rid of it and give the cost to us. And I think it's not an act of Congress. It's an annexation, a series of them that would come to the board to accomplish that.
Trustee Agel, I haven't been through a process where CDOT is offloading a road that it owns and controls. If it's a road or a street that we already own, then the process is simple.
But in this situation that was presented to us, CDOT owns Mary's Lake, do they not?
The county owns it, I believe.
Or the county?
Yep.
Okay. So so CDOT would not be involved with that.
Correct.
So would it go then from county the county taking care of that road to the city taking care of it, correct?
Correct, and that's normally what happens in an annexation. The rights of way that are adjacent to the parcels that we annex normally would come into town ownership, control, regulation, annexation, all of that. And of course, maintenance, it's a cost more than
Right.
it is a value.
Yeah, oh, for sure.
So another area you mentioned was
Before you
Prospect
go
Mountain.
on, Paul,
Okay.
hang on a second. I think we have to have a really good evaluation of the density of vacation rentals in these areas that we're looking at, because we keep hearing that the cost exceeds the benefits to the town, but I'm not sure that's true if there are numerous vacation rentals being brought in as part of it as well. We get 5% sales tax on every rental, and that's a significant benefit to the town. You know, I know we have all this conflict between how many should we have and what the cap is and everything, but at the same time, it's still part of the key financial infrastructure for this town. And so if we gain that by annexation, we're going to be able to replace some of the losses we have in other areas, such as the loss due to converting all of Fall River Village to workforce housing. We lost significant tax revenues as a result of that, and we have to make it up somewhere else. So that's why annexation, in my opinion, should be pursued rather aggressively, because I think there are a lot of benefits out there. There's social benefits of having them part of the body politic, and there's also, you know, the financial benefits that come with bringing them into the town and being able to help provide the services that everyone wants. So I'll get off my soapbox, but that's how I feel about it. So I really like the idea of doing a annexation of the right-of-way to permit that in an area particularly such as that, because there are a lot of vacation rentals over there, particularly on the west side of Murray's Lake Road.
Yeah, if that's of interest to the board, we could certainly work with the county, see if we can map out provide you a map with looking at where those are located.
That would be great, because I think that is a relevant consideration in any place we might want to look at about annexation. It's and of course the county has a limit too, just like the town does in these areas. So you know, some areas would make sense, some areas might not for that very reason. So
There is a map on the county website. It's been about a year since I've looked at it, but you can actually see where all the vacation homes that are licensed anyway, but those are the ones that would be affected. And so you could see, you know, where that density is there, and, you know, the other place I thought was Carriage Hills has a lot.
right, and we're looking at the county maps for this anyway if we're talking about annexation.
Right. Yeah, so you can see that information quite easily and quickly, you know, but also, I would think, I mean, there's a lot of dirt roads and things, then you have to consider maintaining, paving, stormwater. I mean, all that is such a huge picture, I think, other than just that 5% can go away quite quickly when you add up everything that then you have to do for that area, for the infrastructure.
Yeah, I would add to that. I'd be interested in, if we're looking at density of STRs, if all the other pieces that might be a component of that, like code enforcement staff time increases and things like that, that could, you know, may be negligible or may not. But I think that's, if we're gonna, I think just looking at the number of 5%, I think, yeah, it's a larger it feels like a much, much, much larger conversation than the revenue that would be generated by that, when you consider all the management that might need to come with it.
A second area I've mentioned was the area around Prospect Mountain. Similarly, this area is largely built out, single-family homes around an acre in size. There's about 80 properties here, limited opportunity for development or redevelopment. There's approximately 1.6 miles of road here in this neighborhood. They are all unpaved, so to the point of unpaved roads and those costs, certainly a consideration. Public Works has indicated they do not support annexing roads that are not fully compliant with town standards. That typically means a 4-inch asphalt or concrete road with curb and gutter, sidewalk on at least one side. Public Works stated that non-standard streets bring added maintenance costs to the town. There can also be an expectation from taxpayers when they are annexed that they expect a higher level of service, and there might then be pressure to pave roads that maybe are not paved now. One last thing to note in this neighborhood is the Estes Park Tramway does own a few large parcels of land. Should they annex, it would create an enclave of this neighborhood. So just something to note going forward. The last area we looked at was Carriage Hills. There's approximately 550 properties here. There are 11 miles of roads, mostly, or majority, are substandard on many unpaved roads. Again, mostly built out and with a handful of maybe unbuilt lots or some that could potentially be subdivided to allow some additional development. Due to the more dispersed area of this area, annexing a road right-of-way like we talked about for Mary's Lake seems like a less viable option. So we looked into enclaves and trying to map out where those exist in town. So as mentioned previously, an enclave is an unincorporated portion of the county, completely surrounded on all sides by a municipality. There appear to only be 2 currently in town, an area around Highway 7 on the south end of town, and a small area on the northwest part of town around Fawn Valley. So the Annexation Act, the Municipal Annexation Act, does not allow you to count right-of-way in calculating an enclave. So there's a number of areas that look like they would be enclaves but are not. So by way of example, the Highway 7 enclave, I think, would have to be taken in whole. You could not take this smaller chunk at the intersection of Mary's Lake Road and Highway 7 because it's one of the boundaries is right-of-way only. Staff, I know there was interest in the board in maybe mapping properties, all properties that are eligible for annexation. This was not something staff was able to do simply due to the sheer number of properties this would entail. If there's interest in narrowing the scope of that, that might be something we could do. For example, if you were interested in properties over 2 acres, properties that the county has listed as undeveloped in their tax records, things like that that could help narrow it, then we could maybe give you a map of some of those properties that are maybe larger and undeveloped and might benefit from being annexed for development potential or other reasons. So as I mentioned, staff is recommending 2 separate documents to guide annexations: an internal policy to provide high-level direction both to the board, staff, property owners, and the community at large, and then an IGA with the county. So the internal policy, we outlined some high-level concepts of what could be included in that. It's modeled off the I think 6 topic areas in the comprehensive plan. So the natural environment being the first. Annexation should help protect sensitive areas, watersheds, etc. An example would be leveraging an annexation to dedicate parkland or conservation easements. For built environment, annexations should enhance quality of life, preserve local character, etc. So some examples, such annexation should be consistent with the future land use map, should not place undue burden on utility or service providers. Economy, annexation should promote sustainable economic development and town finances. Examples such as diversifying the local economy or tax revenues that offset costs. Housing, annexation should improve supply and affordability of workforce and attainable housing. Health and social, potential example there is annexation improves access to facilities such as parks or daycare. And lastly, transportation and infrastructure, support critical infrastructure, utilities, and transportation. So help facilitate construction of roadways or trails that are identified in adopted plans, avoid annexing streets not up to town standards. So this is a slide I started with, direction we're seeking from you. Are we on the right path, basically? Do you like the idea of the two separate documents? Is the IGA model that we talked about, is that a good approach? Should we start talking to county staff? Mayor?
General approach, okay, but do we know the amenability of Larimer County for considering such an IGA?
The discussions we've had with their, I believe, planning manager is essentially that at a staff level, they're interested, which I assume would reflect their.
So there's not a hard stop there that we know of?
No.
Yeah.
Mayor, I had that question in my mind too. I might have asked that if you hadn't, but I assume we'd start with conversations with the county staff, make sure we're on the same page about what it would include, and then, you know, let it evolve from there.
Other questions from the trustees? This is really great to progress the conversation. I'm not sure what the next steps are. I like the general approach. I like the information that's been shared. It seems like there's a long road ahead to get to this, but I know there's interest on the board. Other questions or comments?
I agree with the mayor. It just seems like a good course of action to take. So appreciate all your work on it, Paul. It's, you know, very enlightening to us to get all these facts about it that, you know, otherwise you just think of it ethereally, sort of. Thanks.
Trustee Brown hit it on the head, I think. Real easy to think about this as high level, but also there are a lot of very valuable details that you have shared with us that are available publicly. Enclaves, the benefit to the town, the cost to the town. I have thought for a long time that I want the town board to work on the little issues that I just can't wrap my head around as a taxpayer. But this, I think that this issue rises to the level of, if you live in Estes Park, you should be weighing in on this through your elected people or the town staff, or give us some impact, some input on this. This is why you elect people. This is why you make the decision for us to come. But we are not all powerful or all knowing, and I need direction from the community on, is this what you want the town to look like in 5 years or 20 years? And this is a very powerful tool that the community can use. I like the idea of having control of some areas, some local control, someone that I can vote for to say, this is how I want to use the community. So I'm not against annexation, but I don't want to annex every inch either. I'm very interested in more conversation. I want to hear from the people, though.
All right. I think we're good for today. Thank you very much, Planner.
Thank you very much.
Future study session items.
Very quick, Mayor. July 8th, we'd like to come talk about the Water Master Plan and our work to collaboratively develop treatment alternatives. On June 10th, we'd like to talk about the Vacation Home Individual Accommodations Unit. That's been a hot topic lately. definition, the vacation home license transferability questions that came up during our last round of vacation home conversations, and an update on the HR strategic plan.
Any other items from trustees? I think that all sounds good. I am going to adjourn this session. We'll have a 5-minute break. We will be moving to executive session at 5 p.m. We'll read the formal announcement at that time relating to personnel matters. And that's it. Okay, take your 5.